Hello and welcome to Caffeine Entertainment. I'm your host, Mental9R. Today's video, something I've never done before. It's a reaction video. I'll be reacting to a video that was recommended to me by my good buddies over at the Game Complainers. Check out their channel if you haven't. Great group of guys. They're always good for a laugh or two, and they definitely do like to complain. So it's always good humor. This is a video done by The Verge back in the Wow, that was weird. My lights just shut off. Anyway, fix that. Back in the era of the GTX 1080 and the Z370 Intel boards. So it's definitely a few years old now. I never saw it. It never came on my radar, but I don't go looking for PC build videos. But apparently it went quite viral. Don't know how I missed it. Now, full disclosure, it's the second time I've watched this because the first time the audio screwed up. And so I'm re-recording it, but I'll try and make note of the things that I found funny anyway, and we will go from there.
So a few years ago, TC, or Managing Editor, built a gaming desktop, but it's kind of out of date, and it's definitely not going to hold up for Battlefield 5. So let's build a new one.
Battlefield 5.
You can build a gaming desktop for around $1,000, but I want to go all out, so I spent around $2,000. A PC like this is going to be able to play most games at ultra settings,
1080. So that would have been high end at the time.
Desktop? Well, of course, first you need a table.
But you got to think back, GTX 1080. I think they retailed at $499, and that was a top end card back in the day. So gives you some perspective when you've got a $1,500 top end card from NVIDIA now.
Preferably not metal. If it's going to be metal, have an anti-static working surface layered on top of it, a thermal paste application.
I've been doing this a really long time, and I got to confess, the only time I'll ever use an anti-static pad is if I'm sitting on the carpet building a PC, and then it has to be dead of winter, really dry air, to the point where just walking across the carpet builds up a static charge. But quite honestly, and this isn't build advice by any means, I've never lost a part to static buildup, and I've built I don't even know how many hundreds of PCs. I've never had a problem. Don't wear static straps, really. I have one somewhere, never use it. I have an anti-static pad somewhere, rarely use that. But anyway, I always find people tend to be a little over cautious. Well, again, not build advice, don't take my word for it. Be as cautious as you want. Parts are expensive. Take the precautions. I'm just saying I've never had anything fail.
An Allen wrench, some tweezers to tighten up.
Can't say I've ever built a PC with an Allen wrench, and
wires. A Swiss Army knife.
Those aren't tweezers. Those are zip ties or tie straps, depending on who you talk to. Oops, drop those. But tweezers. Those are not tweezers. Special note about the spreader that he has there too. Pay attention for later.
Which hopefully has a Phillips head screwdriver in it.
And a Swiss Army knife.
Least, an anti-static bracelet, which is to protect you and the parts. These are the parts you're going to need.
With a Swiss Army knife.
Before we get there, we need to understand what these parts.
And to me, that just looks like a rubber bracelet. I'm not sure how that's anti-static. My anti-static strap has a metal piece that presses into your wrist, and you put it on so it's relatively snug, so there's good contact, and then it has a little snap on the back where you can snap a cable to it. You snap the cable onto your desk, then you have a ground. I don't know what the heck that's going to do, but that's beside the point, I guess. Whatever.
To doing and how they interact with one another. To better understand the parts that make up a desktop, cards are responsible for rendering and processing visuals into what.
I get a kick out of this graphics card with the pin connectors at the far back of it. Not representative of a GTX 1080, let alone anything modern. These would, in scale, be somewhere up here. I don't know who drew that, but it
you see on screen.
Kind of comical.
RPC part supply is which sort of part conflicts you might have and
together.
Where to find deals on new parts. We have a lot of boxes and a lot of.
I'm assuming he's referencing the concept of fitting things together in the sense that, you buy an Intel motherboard, you get an Intel processor, buy an AMD motherboard, AMD processor. So it helps with validating that, along with the RAM selection that you make sure you get the right speed and stuff. Or the right speed as in what DDR version it is. So if you're building an older AMD system or Intel system, it'd be DDR4. If you're building something newer, it's DDR5, right? Stuff like that. It'll help validate for you.
A lot of boxes and a lot of PC parts. So it's
something I noticed that I thought was funny. Note how he's opening this power supply box. If you've ever opened a power supply box, I've never come across one, especially a Corsair, that opens from the side like he's attempting to do. It opens from the end. You lift it up, flips open, and the power supply is there. This guy, he butchers the box. It makes me laugh every time I see it. It's like my son opened it or something, my 12-year-old. Like, he'll just rip the tar out of a box, right? To get, like, he wants to get in. That's what that reminds me of. And you can even see where the, the piece is coming out at the end. Like, you could have just flipped it open. Anyway.
The parts that you really need, place items into the case and make sure that they all fit and then start working. And now we're really going to start building by adding the motherboard in.
And he's talking about fitting pieces into the system and testing it out. If you buy a case, make sure the case has the room to fit the parts that you've bought before you buy it. By the time you get it at home and you've unboxed everything, you don't want to find out that, you know, for instance, your graphics card's too long and it's going to hit the front of the case or it won't go in at all. This, to me, is just silly. Always make sure the measurements are there. When you buy your graphics card, it's going to tell you the dimensions of it. It's going to tell you how long it is. Make sure the case has clearance for it before you buy it. This is just silly.
Some notes about installing motherboards: they're really delicate. You should be really careful with them. And screw in with confidence, but also don't screw in too hard, otherwise you could...
Don't screw in too hard.
Crack the board. I chose Asus's Z370 motherboard.
All kidding aside,
one, it has built-in.
I don't know what you'd have to do to crack like a 6-layer PCB
SSDs, meaning you can get really fast SSDs that are really easy to install. Pay close attention to.
You'd have to be just being insane to do that.
Of the computer. You always have to make sure that you really hammer it in because there's no screw. It really just has to go.
It's the choice of words. Those things, okay, they take a bit of pressure to snap them in place. An IO shield like that, it's not, you don't need a hammer. You don't have to hammer it in. Just firmly snap it in place. Most mid-range to high-end motherboards now, they'll have the heat shields, or the heat shield, the IO shield is attached to the board, so it's just a matter of putting it in. In the rare case, you know, some of the lower-end boards and stuff, and even some of the mid-range ones, they won't have it attached, so you do have to put it in manually. But it's just not that hard. It just, you know, slide one end in and give it a good push together and it'll snap into place. But he is right, it needs to be in nice and solid to make sure that the board actually can fit all the way in to line the screw holes up.
You can't align the motherboard correctly with the holes. We're just going to start installing all 8 screws.
So just, sorry, I'm pausing a lot. Most motherboards, 9 screw holes. There is the odd case where the center pin in the board will have like a little sort of false pin that sticks up. So that's so that when you tilt the board in and you push it into place, that pin can come up and kind of hold it there so that all the other screws run in easily. That might be the case with his, but just for reference, 9, sometimes 10 screws depending on the motherboard. Like extended ATX versions, and the ATX board may have 10. But I can't say I've ever seen one with only 8, unless, you know, the 9th hole is filled with that pin in the middle. Just for reference. And then some will have far less, like a mini ITX or something, micro ITX.
So next,
don't screw them in too hard.
I chose Corsair's 16GB Vengeance LED RAM for 2 main reasons. One, it has LEDs, and we do like lights in our gaming desktops.
I have that bling. Goes way
Fast
faster.
RAM.
FPS goes way up.
2666 megahertz, I believe. So it's pretty fast, and this motherboard supports that speed, which is most important. Open the slots first, and just aligning the...
Note that he opens all the slots. He's got 2 sticks of RAM. 2666. Not that fast. Even for that era, it's, you know, whatever. It is what it is. The need to open all the slots, though, you don't need to do that.
Stick with the middle of the strip, not with the end, and just lining that up with the logo. So once you hear that solid clap...
The funny thing about the way he stuck that RAM in, I'll try and catch that if I can. Oops, double click.
Not with the...
So on an Asus board, and they've been doing this for a long time, the this side of the clip, it actually doesn't actually flip open the way this side does. So the way you put the RAM into an Asus board is that side you would slip down and in first, and you kind of, the notch in the RAM that's right here where my mouse is, there's one like that on the other side. That would clip in here, so you angle it in with that side down, and then you slide this side in secondary. And then this clip, once you've pressed it into place, this clip will close automatically. He's doing it backwards.
The end, and just lining that up with the logo. So once you hear that solid clasp and you don't see the gold connectors on the side anymore, that's when you know the RAM is in. Step 3, we're going to install.
So now I want you to pay attention down here. These two RAM sticks, I laughed a lot harder than the first time I saw it, but it's still pretty funny. So a Z370 board is designed for dual channel memory, or dual channel configuration, let's put it that way. The way you achieve that when you have two sticks of RAM is you use slot A and slot B. On the motherboard, slot A is the second slot in from the CPU. CPU's here, one empty slot, slot A, skip this one, and you go to slot B. So what he's done here, putting them side by side, effectively renders dual channel inoperable, and this is just running in single channel mode, meaning less performance.
The hard drive, or in this case, the NVMe SSD.
So the NVMe SSD, this is an M2 SSD. It is not an NVMe. How do I know that? There's two slots in it. NVMe's have a single slot. At least all current ones do. Maybe I'd have to double check back then, but I'm quite positive back then it was the same way. SSDs 2 slot, NVMe's with a single notch out. This one has 2. You can see a notch here and a notch here. I could rewind that slightly so it's in a better spot where you can see it there. It's a little clearer. 1 slot, 2 slots, SSD, not NVMe.
Install the hard drive, or in this case, the NVMe SSD. I chose this format of
the difference is obviously transfer rates. Back then, NVMe's weren't super fast. I think they're around 1,500 megabytes a second. SSDs,
this is from Kingston,
they'd max out around 500
gigabytes, so it's not
525
a lot. You can always
megs
upgrade
a second.
this and swap it out, and it's only held down by one screw and the latch, so it's really simple and really straightforward. Speed for gaming is important when it comes to a hard drive. You want files to write quickly, and you want games to load quickly, so that's why it's best if you use an SSD. Okay, so step 4, we're going to install the graphics card. I chose PNY's GTX 1080, which is overclocked.
Clap that puppy. You always got to hit it at least twice before you put it in.
And you're going to line this
Note where the connector is. Way up at the front of the card.
Now, which
not at the back like that image had.
Entirely on what other parts you're going to put in the system. I'm just going to pick the top one because the SSD is at the bottom and I don't want to cover it. I just think it looks nice.
So note about that. He said, you know, aesthetically, he's just going to pick the top one because he doesn't want the SSD covered, and that looks pretty cool. There's also technical reasons why you want to use the top slot. Depending on the class of motherboard you have, the chipset that's on it, the top slot might be the only one that has 16 PCIe lanes running to it. The lower slots often will have 4 on a lower end board, and that's going to potentially impact performance. Higher end boards will have multiple options usually. You can get away with putting the card into a lower slot and still have 16 active lanes. If you had, back in the day when you'd have 2 cards, it often split those lanes, so you'd have 2 8-time slots, fully functional. But aesthetically, I always use the top slot too, but I also use it because 99% of, or you always know you're going to get full 16 PCI lanes in the top slot. You're not always going to get that in the lower slots, even if your card fits. And it's a 16 times slot. You don't always get all the lanes, and oftentimes they don't fit in the lower ones anyways, at least these days when you have cards that take up 3.5 PCIe slots. Anyway.
Take your remaining brackets and just put them in the spots that you haven't used.
Okay.
You don't have to screw these in. They get bolted down by the back end bracket, and your GPU is installed.
You don't have to screw it in if your case supports a bracket like this. If your case doesn't have a bracket like this, you need to screw the card in.
Power supply time. I chose Corsair's 850 watt power supply because I need enough headroom for ray tracing GPUs when they come out, and I don't want to have to upgrade it again. So all you have to do is take the brick and make sure that you align it with these little insulating pads.
I miss take the brick. Never called a power supply a brick before.
So just take it in, slide it in nice and easy until you have a
slide it in nice and easy, and don't screw it in too hard.
It's right up against the frame. Now you just take the required screws and you tighten and screw in. So next step, we're going to install the CPU cooler. In this case, it's going to go on the top end of the case, and we're just going to have the hose hang out for a little while until we install the processor, which is going to come a little later. Always be sure to try to place it in the system first before you install it, because you can see it takes
hose, I guess, works too.
But in this case, no pun intended, it fits in perfectly, and we're going to start screwing it in. And so there's nothing special about this screwing in process. They're just really long screws because they go through the entire frame of the cooler, and they take forever. So next up, cables. Every power supply is going to come with a big bag of Velcro cables. It's kind of daunting at first.
That's interesting. I've installed a lot of AIOs. I've not put in a Corsair. I think that was a H115. It looks like a dual 140 mil fan one. Ordinarily, the reason you have really long screws is because they're there so they can go through the fan and then screw into the top of the radiator where it's got the slots. I think he used the wrong screws, to be honest. And I don't see fans on that rad. I don't know if he put them on later, maybe. But they used to come with short ones that you used to mount it to the case. And you don't put in the full length ones and run them right through the radiator. Now, odds are he didn't damage the core. It probably just went through the fins, but I don't know. I don't know. That's a little sus if you ask me. That's very bizarre.
You always have to find the ones that are going to fit. In this case, you need to match those cables with the correct descriptions.
You know, they do come with manuals. I feel like this guy would have benefited from that.
On the power supply. Next step is we're connecting the power supply to the motherboard with the 24-pin cable. We're just matching that cable from the motherboard, threading it through the back, and attaching the 24-pin header to the power supply so that we can have one of the connections complete. The next few additions will be for the GPU, for any specific ports that the case has, for any lighting that the case has, the CPU cooler, anything else really. We're installing the CPU, the heart of the computer or the brain, depending on how you look at it. So to do this, we're just going to remove the plastic covering that they put on the motherboard. We're just going to take this little plastic part out.
There's no fans on that radiator.
And now we have an exposed CPU holder, or rather slot, on the motherboard.
Pocket.
And we're going to use the CPU applicator. This is a special little part that not everyone may get, but this motherboard that we got from ASUS definitely does have. It's called a CPU installation tool.
Thing like that.
It makes it really useful if you want to install a Core i7 hexacore.
Pretty
CPU.
easy to just put it in.
We've got one, and it's an 8th generation chip, and it's ready to go, and it supports overclocking. So what having this little installer does for you is it's basically a brace that you can apply right to the CPU and light it up with the triangles that you'll see on the bottom left corners. And this will make it easier for us to apply it to the motherboard and then apply thermal paste and then apply a CPU cooler on top. And we're just going to carefully lean it down into the system and make sure that everything lines up, and we're going to clasp down on it and we'll be good to go. So we're about to apply thermal paste to the CPU. Every CPU cooler actually comes with a bit of thermal paste already neatly applied in a circle around it, but it's usually not enough. It's good, essentially PC building practice to have a little bit extra and layer it on top of the CPU. The final portion is to add the CPU cooler to the top end of...
The thing with that is the only reason I would ever add anything extra, well, I wouldn't add anything extra. The only thing I might do is clean that TIM off and put my own on, because oftentimes the stuff that comes with it isn't that great. It tends to like harden up over time, and the conductivity goes down, and you'll notice that things start running a little warmer. So often, you know, replacing it with some nice high quality stuff, you'll get better longevity out of it. But You don't need to add more. There's a reason it comes pre-applied. They're not that dumb at the factory.
Of the processor. So you're gonna see that there are 4 brackets, or rather, like screws in here.
Like, what a mess. What a mess.
Right here.
Like, look at that. What is that? He's got that fancy little thermal paste spreader that he showed us at the beginning on the desk, and he didn't use it. Or maybe that is his spreading of the thermal paste. I don't know. But if I'm using a spreader, I'll apply a nice thin coat across the entirety of the CPU. The whole heat spreader gets a nice even coat. Wow.
And they're going to keep the cooler raised off the processor, but it's also going to be close enough to actually physically come in contact with it, like basically keep it cool. Take thumb screws like this and just screw them on. So now that our internals are done, we're going to put all the panels back on, which is the top glass, side glass.
Can't help but notice how they cut away from that. I bet you anything he had a hell of a time doing it the way he was doing that. Just saying.
Front glass, and of course the back panel where all of this fun stuff is happening. So we fully built the PC, everything's put together, and it's running pretty smoothly. Like, I'm averaging 70 and 80 FPS, and this is normally like a very intensive game to run.
It'd be running even smoother if he had the RAM installed, right?
Legends. It's one of my favorite games. I'm actually playing against...
You can still see it here. Sticks are side by side, no gap in between.
It's a bot, and I'm distracted, so I'm not actually doing...
No, I could be wrong. Maybe that specific board... No, I've never seen a board where you have to install them side by side. Never. So I take that back.
So well.
I tell you, that's quite a video. I hope no one ever used it as a build guide. That's all I can say. But thanks to the guys. I'll shout them out again, the guys at the Game Complainers. Check them out. Kind of a crazy video. Definitely insane. I can't believe a lot of the things that happened there, and I can't get over the Swiss Army knife. That's classic, and I mean, handy, I guess, for cutting those tweezers. Maybe handy for that. But anyway, thanks for joining me. If you watched the video this long and got through to the end, I greatly appreciate it. Please don't be afraid to hit that like button, the subscribe or follow button, depending on if you're watching this on YouTube or Rumble. I do post to both. So if you like the green buttons, you can go to Rumble. If you like the red, you can go to YouTube. Thanks again for joining me. I'm Mental9R. This is Caffeine Entertainment. And don't forget, it's time to wake up and play some games.